This is Dr. Jillian Hartley, and on behalf of Arkansas Northeastern College's College Histories, I am interviewing Dr. James Shemwell today. It is October 30th, 2024. Dr. Shemwell served as the institution's president from 2013 to 2023, although his history with the institution goes back much, much further, and we're going to explore that in our interview today. Dr. Shemwell, do I have your permission to record?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Well, Dr. Shemwell, if you don't mind, I would like to get some background information on you. So can you tell us a little bit about when and where you were born?
Well, I was born March the 15th, the Ides of March in 1965 at the Grille Air Force Base Hospital.
Well, that's great. And of course, so you're a Mississippi County native. Mm-hmm. Can you describe a little bit about your family growing up?
When I was born, we lived on base, my mother and father, and I had two older brothers that were nearly 17 and 19 when I was born. My mother had been married previously while my dad was out seeing the world in the United States Air Force. And so that's a little bit about my family history. My brothers were pretty much out of the household by the time I was up and walking good. So I guess in a lot of ways I grew up like an only child. But that's the makeup of my family.
So where did you go to high school?
Went to Blytheville High School through the 11th grade, actually. The odd thing, I hold a doctoral degree, but I do not have a high school diploma. I quit after the 11th grade and came out to Mississippi County Community College. I was a young man with a mission and a vision, and wanted to get. I was in a hurry. And so I quit after the 11th grade, but I attended Bible school systems.
So Mississippi County Community College was a place to come and continue your education.
Absolutely.
And so can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to pursue a career in higher education? Because you've spent decades in higher education. So what were some of those early things that made you think maybe higher ed is for me?
Well, there's one story in particular I'll share with you. After I attended MCCC for a year and got most of my basics, and then went to Arkansas State University to work on an accounting degree. And in my last semester, in my senior year, I was taking electives. And, again, I was a young man with a mission, and I wasn't taking easy courses. I was taking senior-level finance courses for my free electives. But I had a professor named Dr. Bill Williams who was teaching a capital management course. And I knew Dr. Williams because I worked at ASU. 2 months after I turned 19, I started to work at their Small Business Development Center and I was a small business consultant. And so I knew Dr. Williams in that capacity, and he came to my office one day about 45 minutes before class. We had a 2 p.m. class. And he said, well, my stomach's hurting and I'm having to use the restroom a lot, and I don't know if I can teach class today. And this is important. I can't afford to lose any classes. I wonder if you could come up and teach class today. And, I was 20 years old. Like most 20 years, I was just full of confidence. Well, sure, I could do that. So I, looked over the material a little bit. I was prepared, and so I went in and I taught the class that day, and there was a lot of questions and participation. And what stuck with me is I enjoyed it. And what stuck with me is the next week when we took a test over that section, I had several students, including ones that I didn't know, that came up to me and said, you know what, I don't know how I did on that test. It was a hard class. But they said, the part that you taught, I got that right. And that stuck with me. Now, it didn't bear fruit right away. I went on from ASU to Texas Tech and got a finance degree, and that's what I thought I wanted to do in my career, is be a finance person. And to kind of shorten that story, the Commonwealth Savings and Loan, I came back to Arkansas in 1988 and went to work for them, and then they were acquired by a bank called South Bank. South Bank had a mortgage company called Corinthian Mortgage, and Corinthian Mortgage had mortgage offices all around the country, in big cities. In fact, they're one of the top 10 thrift lenders or savings banks as opposed to commercial banks, one of the top 10 thrift lenders in America in 1993. And that was the year that our CFO died, and he was a 46-year-old marathon runner, dropped dead Labor Day weekend, 1993. And I was summoned because the kind of operation we were running, you didn't have time to go out and do a job search, and I had the background. And so I stepped into that capacity. It was a challenging job because we did $2 billion of loans in 1993, but we only had a deposit base of $150 million. So how are you doing that? Well, we were selling those loans, packaging them up like loans, and selling them to the government, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae. But they would only buy certain days of the month, so you had to come up with cash while you're waiting to sell. So we would borrow against those loans. Well, even that process, it would take a week to get the loan paperwork, so I'd have to broker CDs on Wall Street. I was doing all this stuff. 28 years old. I mean, it was, in terms of what I had pictured, what I thought I wanted, I was, at the risk of sounding immodest, I was doing well. I was living it.
You had made it.
I'd made it. But, and even though it was very intellectually stimulating and challenging, it just was not fulfilling, because at the end of the day, really all I was accomplishing, because I didn't work with customers to get their first home or to get a car, I was just making a handful of wealthy stockholders wealthier. Yeah. And there was a pull. I felt a pull. I wanted to come back home. And I was in Corinth, Mississippi at that time. And there was a job open at the college, and I applied for that job, and interview went well. Jim McLean was the head of the interview committee. Dr. Robin Myers was the hiring manager. He was dean for continuing ed then. And the interview went well, and Dr. Myers offered me the job at the end of the interview. But the only issue was what he could pay me at that time was about a 30% pay cut. And I had 2 small kids at home. And I said, well, I want this job, but I can't do this. 2 weeks later, McLean calls me back, and he says, well, we want you to come back for another interview. Except this time we want you to interview with the Osceola, South Mississippi County Chamber of Commerce. Because what we've talked to them about is partnering. And so you would be our Osceola Center coordinator. That was my first job. And you would also be their part-time chamber director. And they'll pay you a part-time salary for that. And I came back and interviewed, and it went well, and they offered a salary. Now, again, in the beginning, it still ended up being about a 10% pay cut, but I wanted to come back, so I took that job. And I think there's a higher hand at work in things like this, because 2 weeks after I came to work for the college, which was October the 16th, 1994, my dad died. And so we were able to be here and help my mother, recover and transition after my dad's death. And so it was all very timely. But it was my chance to get into higher ed. So that's the story.
And that's how you arrived at MCCC, Mississippi County Community College. So during your tenure at ANC, what different titles and roles did you have throughout the years?
The initial title was Osceola Center Coordinator. That morphed into Director of Training, and I know we're going to talk about solutions groups, so I'll save that. That eventually, I came to the main campus, and Dr. Myers, who at that point had become the chief academic officer, he married the custom training operation to the solutions group together with the academic technical programs. And so I became the dean for that area. And so I was in academics for a while, about 10 years. That was 1999. In 2010, I went back to my finance roots, and I became the college's chief financial officer, chief fiscal officer, vice president for finance. And so I did that until I was appointed president New Year's Day on the 13th, 2013.
Well, before we kind of get more into that, I do want to kind of go back to the early years of the college and to see if there's anything in particular you might want to share about, because you are from the county and you are someone who came and took some classes as a student. So is there anything you can share with us about the founding of the college in its early years?
Well, we're obviously we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the vote that was before Christmas in 1974. What I can remember about that, I remember the campaign. There were bumper stickers and signs and people that went door to door. We had a bumper sticker on our refrigerator. My parents thought that would be a really good thing if we had a college here. And even at 9 years old, I thought, yeah, that sounds like it'd be pretty cool. And of course, the vote passed. What I can tell you about as a student here, it was all so new, and there was a lot of, I think, enthusiasm is the word I would use from the people that worked here then and taught here then. There are lots of folks that I think of in those early years, and I think that's I maybe coming up on a question, so I'm going to let you ask your question.
Well, I can ask it because that's it. There's a lot of some of the interviews have talked about some stories and some anecdotes about some of those early notable figures. So feel free to share any that you have.
Well, I had the pleasure of working for Dr. Sullins and Dr. Myers. I'd never worked for Dr. Smith, but I was a student here his last year as president, and I knew who he was. His son Jimmy was my age. We went to school together, and in a lot of the public school classes, they would seat you alphabetically. So Smith sat behind Shemwell, and so I knew his son really well. His wife Margaret was my 10th grade French teacher, and so I'd met Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith was a very outgoing, gregarious man. Very much a champion for the college. He was a trailblazer. That's what the college really needed in its early days. And Harry V. Smith filled that bill marvelously. Very interesting man. Dr. Sullins, Dr. John Paul Sullins, came to work as the CAO about the time I began going to school here. I think it's fair to say Dr. Smith had in his down the road picture an idea that he was going to leave. He was here 9 years, which is a long time for a college president, especially a founding one. But he hired Dr. Sullins to be CAO. And what I didn't know a lot about Dr. Sullins then, I obviously did when I came to work here. He was a very different personality. Dr. Sullins knew how to socialize, but he is not what you would think of as a gregarious, outgoing person. Dr. Sullins was more reserved. What I really came to appreciate about him is he had the most droll sense of humor, and I thought he was funny. He's not the kind of guy who wore humor on his sleeve, but when he did, it was either wickedly funny or it just fell flat as a pancake. And either way, I thought it was funny. He always could make me laugh, and I think the same was true for me. I think Dr. Sullins liked me because, I guess I wasn't scared of him. And I'd tell him an off-color joke or something like that nobody else would, and he would laugh, But thinking back as a student, a couple of other figures I would mention is my very first semester in June of '82, English Composition 1. My instructor was Mary Alice Dement, who had a very long and rich career here at ANC. And what I remember about her that first semester is she was just really cool. We would have breaks because these were summer classes, and we'd go to the, at that time you had a smoking lounge, and she would come down and smoke cigarettes with the students and shoot the bull with them. And in class, it wasn't, too unusual that she might let a cuss word drop. And that's when I really knew I'm not in high school anymore. This is different. And I feel like an adult in here. And so, and of course, as you know, she and I were great friends. We used to have a lot of smoking conferences in her van where we discussed college business. The other person I'd mention is Coach Bill Tyre. Coach Tyre I had for bowling and for tennis. I think he still claims credit for my success as a result of those experiences. But Coach Tyre was, Bill, I guess, was about 40 then. but had white hair. He was a silver fox, and drove a white, I can't remember if it was a white Corvette or a white Trans Am, this sports car, and we had a good basketball team in the 80s, a great basketball team. Bill was and still is a coaching genius. He just has an ability to spot players. He can spot talent especially that fits into how he wants to play, and an ability to motivate and organize those players. We were number 2 in the country at one point in the late 80s. And you could see it when Bill became, after we did away with the basketball program, and as a lot of the 2-year schools in the state did at that time, they changed some legislation that made it more difficult to fund. After a while, Bill started volunteering at Blytheville High School. And, and Blytheville's had some great years over the years, but back at that time, they really weren't challenging for anything, and in 2 years, he had them in the state championship game. That's not accidental. Bill was funny. There's a lot of stories that probably don't need to go into the archives, I could tell. But here again, Bill was one of those instructors, Coach Tyre, that you understood you weren't in high school anymore, and you were in a good place. And those are 2 of the memories I had. It was scary for me because I quit school. And I remembered, I was kind of driven by fear, because if I'm not successful with this, I'm going to have to go back and get a GED. And 40-plus years ago, there was more of a stigma involved with that. And there shouldn't be, but that was 40 years ago. I didn't want to be one of those high school dropouts. And so I worked really, really hard in college. But the experience I had with those 2 and others, and there were certainly others, it really gave me a lot of confidence, and it helped me get off to what ended up being a successful college career.
And so when you came back, they were both still there, so you had them as instructors. So when you came back to ANC, of course, when we look at the evolution of higher ed over the last 30 to 40 years, lots of things have changed. So when you came back and first started teaching, what was sort of the mission of the college at that time?
Well, what I will say, Dr. Hartley, is I think that the college has been pretty consistent from its origins in terms of our overarching goals and missions. Excuse me. It was like it is today. It was I can't recite the mission to you that existed then, but it dealt with student success, and it dealt with lifelong learning. And if you look at the mission today, that's still what it speaks to. The language has changed. It may have become more precise, or you may see different words than you saw 50 years ago. But the college, I think, has been very consistent in being a student-focused, student-centered college, and all about lifelong learning.
So I do want to ask you about the origins of the Solutions Group and your role in it.
Oh, this is a story that I'm so glad you're asking me about this, because it's a very interesting story, and what we as a college did over time with that was incredible. When Dr. Myers hired me, as I mentioned, I was the Osceola Center coordinator, but there was a line item in the job description to develop a vehicle for workforce training. And he had done some research. He'd been to North Carolina, the Piedmont colleges up there, or out there, and he had also been to West Ark, which is now UA Fort Smith. West Ark really was the first college in the state that got into this. Kind of imploded later, but I'll mention that. But early on, they were really doing some good things, and he'd done a bunch of research. Dr. Sullins had tasked him with, we need to be servicing our employers here, especially in manufacturing, and we really aren't doing much of anything with them, so we've got to figure out how to serve them. And so he tasked me with that, and a real key with it is, earlier I told the story about the partnership with the Osceola South County Chamber. The first real company that let us do a significant training program for them was called Southwire Specialty Products in Osceola. And the way that I got into that company and got their attention, and I did all of them early on this way, I didn't go in there with college hat on, because the companies here just didn't take us seriously at that point. We'd not done any of this kind of stuff. They didn't have a reason to take us seriously. So I went in with my Chamber of Commerce hat. That's how I would get the invitation. And I'd go in and see their operations, and tried to be a quick study because I was a banker. I didn't know anything about manufacturing, so my education expanded geometrically every time I went into a company. But I listened to them, and what are the things they're looking for. And one of the early things we did was called the WORK program, Workforce Orientation and Retraining Keys, because what they were telling us was the biggest need we have was just the basic stuff. How to come to work on time, how to get along with other people. How it's just some basic things you need to be successful at work in manufacturing. And so we fashioned a program, and a lot of the manufacturing people I used as instructors for the different pieces of that program. It was a non-credit class. And we put, the first iteration of that, or the first, cycle, I should say, where there were several iterations, we put well over 100 people to work, and the companies loved it. So they suddenly now they take us seriously because we met a big need they had. That's about the time that Southwire Specialty Products said, well, let's do this bigger thing. And so we started, and let me say something about that. We called it SSP University. There was a slate of, they were almost all, I think, non-credit courses at that time, but they were different skill courses. And we would deliver them in the daytime to the day shift. They ran 3 shifts. So we delivered a day shift training, we delivered a night shift training, we delivered a graveyard shift training in the middle of the night. We used to send Paul Shipley out there in the middle of the night to teach classes. And when I would visit other companies, I was this is an inarticulate name. I was a salesperson. That's what I did. We didn't call it sales, but that's what it was. And so when I'd go see a company, I'd say, well, here's the contact at Southwire Specialty Products. You call and talk to him. And if you're not satisfied with what he says, then you just, you shoot me an email and I'll never contact you again. Well, that worked because they were good spokespersons for us. And then as we would add companies, I'd do the same thing. Well, the story I love to tell is the big fish story. And the big fish story is I'd pitched a big training program to a company that's not here anymore. They were called American Chain and Cable Company, ACO, in Blytheville. And they were getting ready to try to get QS 9000 certification, which is a quality certification. And so it affects a lot of your different operations. And so after listening to what their needs were, put together a program that would address those things, lots of classes. And what Dr. Myers and I had been talking about is we need some full-time people. The first employee we hired was Paul Shipley, and we hired him half-time, and he did basic skills type things. And we were using some adjuncts, but the difficulty, and this is why so many colleges have never really been able to penetrate this market, is they use part-time people, adjuncts, who have a primary job that obviously is their first priority. So you're having to work around those schedules. And I said, Robin, we've got to be able to get some full-time employees where we're the first priority, and we can then work around the client's schedule. So ACO was, they bought off. They said, we like this program. We want to do this. There was many disciplines, and it was a big project that would pay us a lot of money to provide the training. So I called the main office. I was in Osceola then, so I called Dr. Myers, and he had a secretary then named Amanda Glass. And she was a great lady, great assistant. But she knew that when Dr. Myers and I got on the phone, it probably was going to be a 45-minute, 30-hour-long conversation. Now, I think she always attributed that to me. She didn't understand Robin was doing as much talking as I was. Those were the early days, and they were fun because we were talking about everything was so new, and we were building, and it was fast. And we would spend a lot of time. So she told me, well, he's in a meeting right now, and he can't come to the phone. I thought, well, okay. Well, at that time, internet still was not real big. They had a fax machine right there by his office. So I got one of the old fax cover pages, from Jim Shemwell to Robin Myers, one page, just the cover page. And I drew on it a water line. I used to like to draw when I was a kid. I don't know that I was ever very good at it, but I liked it. And I drew a John boat, and kind of a stick figure sitting in the John boat. And he's got a fishing pole. And down below the water line, there's this fish that's about 5 times the size of the boat, and he swallowed that hook. And the fish, he's got a great big $sign on it. And all the message read was, please call. And I sent that. I had to go to the front of the building in Osceola to send that to Blytheville. And by the time I got back to my office, about 30 seconds, I had a phone call. She put that in front of Robin, and, I guess whatever meeting he was in, he got out of.
He was good.
And he said, looks like the fish is about to swallow the boat. And I said, well, if we don't hire some instructors, he is. That's really what kind of kicked it off. He was able to convince Dr. Sullins that we need to take a risk and make an investment. And I think at that time we hired 4 full-time instructors. We hired a couple more half-time instructors. You may remember that year, Jillian. I got them all T-shirts and brought them to reconvening. It's like, what's this army Shemwell's got all of a sudden? And, we were told then that, this isn't like a normal faculty contract. I mean, this is going to have to work year one, or these people are not going to have jobs next year. We made it work, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and it's still very successful today.
Oh,
yeah.
Very much so. Dr. Sullins, he rolled the dice there, but it paid off. And Jillian, within 3 years, we were the premier provider in Arkansas. I mentioned West Ark's effort kind of imploded, and they had a great program. That's who we modeled after. But the one mistake they made is they were trying to fit their trainers, their faculty, into a traditional faculty compensation box. And what we were doing just didn't fit that. They weren't teaching many 3-hour courses. They were teaching a lot of stuff that was not credit-bearing, and they were being asked to do a lot of things that were very unconventional versus what traditional faculty were asked to do. Long story short, their instructors met with themselves, and one day they all quit and they took the clients with them. Because they're the ones that had the client's confidence, and West Ark didn't give up. They tried to build it back, but it was never the same. And we developed a model. We saw that. We paid attention to that. And so the model we had, I won't go through all the details, but it basically, once you covered your contract with billings, meaning your salary and your fringe benefits, then every billing dollar after that, we'll share a third of that with you. And that's what was overload for them. It never brought them to what they could make in the private sector. We could never compete with them, still can't today. Because who you're always looking for there is someone who's got a fever, somebody who wants to try education. But you can't, they can't take a beating pay-wise if they have a family. You've got to get it somewhere that they can afford to do it. And we learned that lesson. If I could share one more thing about Solutions Group.
Sure, please do.
We have had so many great instructors over the years. We tried to hire people who not only had some education, but they had real experience in their field and often certifications in their field, people who were very credible and had currency. And we've had good managers of the Solutions Group over the years. But there are two people, 2 women that stand out in particular that I want to say a few things about because they've been so important in the success we had. First one I would mention is a lady named Anita Bracken. Anita, when she was on my interview committee, she worked for the college part-time or half-time. She still had little kids. She wasn't quite wanting a full-time job at that point. And she was doing seminars. She would set up seminars. But when we started all this, we changed Anita's role and we made her a full-time employee. and she was support. She worked closely with me. And as the thing grew, and and I went to the main campus and now start to have other responsibilities, well, I more and more tried to teach Anita what I was doing, and I'd take her on the client visits or sales calls, if you will, and she's a very quick study. And the clients loved her mostly because she delivered what she promised. She always kept her word to them. She provided great service to them. Now, when I think back, Anita was smart. She was funny. She was always impeccably dressed and manicured, and they loved her. When she left the college after several years, the lady that took her place was a lady named Stacy Walker, who's still there today. And Stacy is great with computer technology. Stacy was able to digitize a lot of our processes that made billing easier and scheduling easier, things that were very time-consuming. She reduced them down because she's so smart with computers. And she took a very different tack than Anita did with the service. Stacy's much more laid back and easygoing, casual, more, kind of a good old girl. And the companies love that. The students love her. And she's done a tremendous job. Stacy has been the driving force of the Solutions Group for over a decade, and I'm so pleased that the last budget that I worked on as president, we promoted her to dean because she absolutely deserves it.
So let me ask you a question, though, because the Solutions Group obviously is doing a lot of training for industry, but I do want to kind of look at how there was a merger because you start off at MCCC, and then there's a merger with Cotton Boll Tech, which does technical training. So do you have any thoughts to share about the merger and then obviously how that translated into technical training?
Yeah, what the merger really did more than anything else is it allowed the college to offer a truly comprehensive, full array of technical programs within a culture of accountability to employer needs. There were programs that the VOTEC offered that sometimes we would get requests from companies that we'd like you to do this kind of welding training for us, and this. And we were always sensitive to that because we don't want to compete with another public entity. And so we would, you should talk to. We did some things around the fringes, maintenance welding and stuff like that. But we tried to stay away from those things because that was Cotton Boll's, those were their programs. When the merger came about, that put an end to all that. You've got two different shops. Everything then was under common leadership. And it made it so much better. I would say the merger was a great thing for our local companies and an even better thing for our students.
And the county.
County, absolutely.
Bringing together both. So I'm going to ask you to kind of reflect on campus culture because you've essentially worked for the college for...
I worked 29 years.
29 years. I was going to say about over 30, but okay, so 29 years. So during your time at ANC, what are some of the changes that you saw in campus culture? And then if you could follow up and let us know what you think some of the things that influence those changes were.
Okay. No, sure. It's something I'd love to talk about. One of the things that changed in the culture, I think ANC, and it's a reason that college has always, I think, since its origins, been on the leading edge, is ANC has always supported innovation. It's supported inventiveness. But one thing that changed, and I certainly tried to influence this when I was president, is there's a difference between supporting innovation and rewarding innovation. I know you remember because you were a recipient many times.
A few times,
yes. Of ABC, what we called ABC Awards, Advancement by Collaboration, the Best Practices, Merit Awards. I believed, and still do believe, and believe our results speak that it worked, that you should reward good ideas. And we weren't making anybody rich with these little stipends we were giving, but if you've got, the last couple of years, I remember as president, gosh, we were having like 60 or 70 projects which involved 150 people. If you've got 150 out of 230 employees actively working on making things better, you're going to have a high-performance organization, and we do. And so I think that's one thing. And Dr. Myers was good at this too. He didn't do it, quite on steroids the way that I did, but he certainly led the way that it's important to not just talk about innovation. It's important to support and reward those who are innovators, because that's how you get there. People will do it just because they have a desire to for a while, but when you make it real for them, then that's when they really get engaged and they self-actualize and be the best instructor or staff member they can be. And in the process, they're going to make your organization the best it can be. And I think, were you about to ask
Well, I was going to say,
question?
too, it wasn't that, and I could be wrong here, but I know you did a lot of research for your doctorate. Is that correct? Or I was thinking that at some point you had done some research on that.
I did. It's
When you were-
related. It's
Okay.
related. Yeah, I'll give that a quick plug here.
Okay.
What it really dealt with, my doctoral studies I have a doctor of management in organizational leadership. And of course, what fascinated me and what my research was about was change leadership. And what I studied and researched was a concept that I guess you could say that was my niche, as you know, as a doctor. Mm-hmm. That's what you're going for, some small little niche that nobody else has really researched, and you become, the proverbial expert at that. What I was interested in was the concept of perceived momentum and how celebration of progressive milestones affects perceived momentum. And from there, how the perception of momentum increases the willingness to expend extra effort, greater satisfaction with leadership, a greater perception of leadership effectiveness. A lot of research had been done on those things, but not on this particular element. And so you're very astute. What I'm talking about with those ABC awards and so many things, God bless you, you had to sit through about 60 of my speeches as president, is our faculty, our history professor, always talked about the milestones that we were achieving, because, again, that's what I was trying to generate is momentum. Along those lines, you talked about what has influenced some of the changes. And from my seat, I think something that had a major impact on that, I want to talk about it a little bit, was, and it's kind of an unusual conversation for higher education, but I think that Dr. Myers and I both had a background in the private sector, and we were actually both accounting majors. We both had business training. That's what we were trained in. I think it was great benefit. And I don't just mean he and I combined were president, I guess, about 18 years. But before that, Dr. Myers was here 15 years or so. And I can tell you from what I've been told, and I guess he started 4 or 5 years before I did, and I could certainly see this by the time I got here, he very much had Dr. Sullins' ear. Now, Dr. Sullins made his own decisions. I'm not trying to suggest he didn't, but what Dr. Sullins did is he put great value on Dr. Myers' opinion. And I think because of why that was, and this is what I'm told, is very early on, a lot of these issues that his cabinet was dealing with at that time, Dr. Sullins, Dr. Myers would have a different perspective, and there would be these moments of clarity that people would, you know what, this probably would work. And so he had a big influence on the last half. Dr. Sullins was president of our college for 22 years. That back half, Dr. Myers had a lot of influence. That's where the solutions group arose, and so many other things. And I think that, it's an unusual fit for higher ed. I think people think it is. I think it was the answer for us. Because when, so many people look at it and say, well, the private sector has a profit motive, and we don't have a profit motive in higher ed or K through 12 ed, and so it really doesn't fit. I don't think that's true, and here's why. There's more than one way to define profit. We tend to think of profit as a financial profit, making money, and no, that's not what we're trying to do in education. But there are different ways to look at profit. In our business, Jillian, a profit occurs when a student completes what he or she came to the college to achieve. That's a profit. A profit is realized when that student takes that and goes out to do whatever it is they set out to do after college. I'd argue 95% of cases or more, that's a new career, or it's a better career within the existing field that improves their quality of life for themselves and their family. That's a profit. And so what I tried to do, and I think Robin did as well, is we tried to affect our operations in ways that maximize the kind of profit that you're trying to achieve. That's private sector thinking. In the private sector, it very much is survival of the fittest. In the public sector, I'm sorry to say, it's often survival of the fattest. The bigger a bureaucracy becomes, the more employees, aka voters, they have, the bigger pot of money they control with vendors who benefit from that, the more political influence they have, and the more difficult it is to ever change anything. In the private sector, if you don't do things right, you don't survive. You go out of business. In the public sector, that's almost never the case. And that's why I think one thing that has given ANC a huge edge, even if people realized it was happening or not, that private sector perspective and that influence, I think, has given us an edge that not many colleges have.
It's always put us out on the cutting edge.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's very innovative, and that's one thing that I've noticed doing interviews. The innovation that drive is something that so many people touch upon.
It is. It's one last thing I would say about that. I think another, maybe misconception that public sector folks have about the private sector. Well, in the private sector, they motivate performance chasing people around with a stick. No, more than if they're successful, they're chasing people around with carrots. That's what I tried to do. The stuff we were talking about earlier. And if you have somebody that's getting dysfunctional or counterproductive, then you got to break out the old stick and explain things to people. But that doesn't happen too much. The best way is you chase them with carrots, and that usually works pretty well.
Well, there's a lot of significant things that happened when you were president, and one of them was the building of the Allied Tech Center. But I kind of want to reflect on just any of the buildings and landmarks and campus features with other stories of historical significance, and then kind of ask you then to talk specifically about that center.
Okay. Well, the two for me that are historical, and then I'll talk about some of the things that happened during my decade of being president. The Harry L. Crisp Center was we sold that property. The foundation did. The foundation owned the Crisp Center. That was so pivotal for us. Harry L. Crisp was and still is today the chairman of Marion Pepsi Cola, which is a big regional Pepsi Cola operation. And when they left Blytheville, he donated that facility to the college, and it gave us a space. That's Dr. Sullins gave to Dr. Myers and said, well, here you go, and go out and make it happen. And it was not long after that I was hired and we started doing these things. We couldn't have done it without that space, without that facility. I was so pleased before I retired that we actually got Harry L. Crisp to come back, and we had a great dedication ceremony for a beautiful plaque that's in the vestibule of that new center, recognizing that contribution, because we couldn't have done it without Harry L. Crisp. So to me, he's a giant in our history. He really is. The other thing, it's not a major thing, but I think you were here long enough to remember this. I always thought it was unique, the big horseshoe drive that we had coming into campus. Were you working here then?
I think so, yeah.
You would come in that main entrance, and the horseshoe would come all the way up almost to the front door. And then just as quickly it would reverse and go back out. Now, I think Dr. Sullins was smart to change things and break it up and make it more green space than it is, but I always thought that was unique. Dr. Sullins was a botanist. A lot of people don't know that. That was his field of specialty, and you can still see it. His fingerprints are all over the campus because he believed, rightly so, that the way your campus appears affects not only people's willingness to attend there, it affects retention. You want to attend college somewhere that you like to come there. You feel proud to come there. And I tried to do some things with landscaping too. During my time, some of the notable things we did, I think the first thing we did is I decided, we put this sign up about 1980, and this is 2013. How about a new sign? And so we replaced our old sign that was lit up but was not digital with our new, beautiful digital sign and the barrel vault over it. And I think that was a great thing for us because it gave us a new image and a good image and a sign that's a great advertising tool. We converted what was called the Outback, our old student cafe, and we took out all the fixed booths and those things and made it more open and more colorful and more inviting and renamed it the Sunshine Grille, and we enclosed the patio and made it an atrium, and then we took the G building that formerly housed our horticulture program and made it the Sunroom, where you can go and play billiards, play video games, just hang out. And because, so much research, Tinto is the guy Robin always quoted. He did his dissertation on a lot of Tinto stuff. That and Tinto is a retention expert, that if people feel connected, they're going to have a much greater likelihood of retaining and finishing what they started. And so I think that was a great thing. I was tickled to death, and I gave it a like on Facebook. I'm glad to see we're doing a movie in the Courtyard Amphitheater.
Yes.
I bet you had something to do with that. You did the first one. No,
I did
you
the
did the
first
first one.
I
We
did.
did all
I
those
did,
years
yeah.
ago, and I think we had a chili thing then too. I'm still meant to ask you, where to get the Hungarian oregano, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
But the Courtyard Amphitheater is a project we did. We renovated State House Hall. We renovated the library, and made both of them more modern, more inviting, more colorful. And, of course, the Center for Allied Technologies was, I guess, the landmark thing for me. It brought together the former Burdett Center, the Crisp Center, and the Acme Aircraft and Metals Engineering Center, and moved it all to the main campus. It's, I think, still the biggest single footprint project that we ever had, bigger even than the original building. It was the biggest capital raising project that we ever had. Now, I will say I made one prediction correctly when I left. I told people that Dr. Hegel would be a better fundraiser than the previous four of us put together, and it didn't take him a year until we're sitting right now, in ANC Wilson, the second biggest donation to a community college ever. So I was right on that one.
Yes, you were.
But the center before that, the Center for Allied Technologies was our biggest project, and we had so much private participation in that. And of course, our foundation stepped up in a big way, and our board stepped up in a big way. We had been saving money for years, for the proverbial rainy day. And I talked about all the things that were happening economically and development-wise in our county. And I said, folks, it's raining, and we need to do this. We need to build a facility that leaves no doubt. Our companies were all sold because we had served them. But when you bring in new prospects, the Crisp Center and certainly the former Burdett Center did not inspire awe, other than resourcefulness, that you could take something like this and do something successful with it. It's all different now. I mean, they come in and they see this facility and they realize it just changes everything. Cliff Chitwood, was so happy to have this new center, and what a great economic developer he's been for our county. I'm very proud of it. I guess the last meeting I was there, or near the last, they named the vestibule, put my name on the vestibule, and that's just such a thrill for me.
Yeah, and it's an amazing building,
Yes,
and it definitely will stand the test of time. And something that I didn't ask you, but I know, thinking about it, you were here when the air base closed, and you were at MCCC when it closed. And you think about
right
a lot
after,
of,
I think it was right
but,
after.
you think about there were a lot of concerns
Yes.
about what that could do, but a lot of what you kind of told us is how the college stepped up.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any memories of that period of when it was closing, when those fears were there, that you would like to share?
I can. Yes. No, I want to say that the base closed in 93, maybe. I may be wrong. I think it was just before I came to work in 94. And yes, it was very much a topic of concern. And I think it was from my perspective, living most of my life in Mississippi County, the bigger, trying to think of the right word, the bigger blow was not the loss of the population number. It was the cultural loss. We had airmen and airwomen from all 50 states and their spouses. And of course, their spouses often would get involved in the community and in the schools. And they were, by and large, with very few exceptions, just good people, good quality people. And when we lost that, we really lost something that hurt. And we went through a period in this county, for about a decade, where we were rapidly losing population, people moving away. I think that the success of the steel industry, beginning with Nucor Yamato and then Nucor Hickman, and of course now Big River Steel, High Bar, and all the others, have helped us to recover some. But that was a significant challenge. We just persevered. I think we always tried to get better at what we were doing. I think that we early on realized that online courses were going to become much bigger than just the fad that they were, the interesting novelty in the beginning when people like you and me were working on that, and not too many people were interested. I think we saw, and the leadership quickly did, that this is going to catch on in a big way, and we're going to have to learn to get proficient at it, or we're going to be left behind.
And I believe you started the process team.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. That's you've heard me have to say this, I think, Jillian, that it was so ironic that I was on the cutting edge of that back then, and by the time I retired, I was one of the most computer illiterate employees the college had.
Shows you how fast things have changed.
How much things have changed. That's right.
So as president, though, and even all throughout your tenure, you have had the opportunity to get to know a lot of people who are alumni.
Mm-hmm.
And something about ANC is there's such a community backing for the college. So do you have anything to share about how the alumni have shaped the college and the community have helped shape the college and its legacy?
Well, I think and I've listened to some of your other oral histories, all great, by the way. I think other people have touched on this. Think about how many people that work at ANC today went to school at ANC. It certainly was the case for me. It was the case for Dr. Myers. And so that has a big impact. But my goodness, think of how many people in Mississippi County and the surrounding area have ANC's touched them. They attended college here. They went through some training here. They did something. And I think for the most part, people have given back. Now, it may be nothing more than being a good ambassador for the college. They might not be in a position to donate money, but they talk up the college. They encourage their kids or someone they go to church with or their neighbor to hey, you ought to consider going to ANC. That's what our alumni have done for the college, and I think it's one of the big reasons why we've been so successful.
Well, Jim, in addition to things like the base closure, can you talk about some of the other significant challenges? Because there have been a lot of challenges to in education and to higher ed over the last several decades. So are there any that stand out to you?
Well, there's obviously the coronavirus. I know there's a question coming up on innovation. I'm going to touch on that a little bit there. The one, this will be, I guess, a different part of your oral history from my perspective. Dr. Myers is, I think when you interviewed him, he was still the system president over at ASU, so he couldn't talk about these things too much. But what I'll talk to you about, the biggest threat that we faced during my presidency, and I think pretty much all the time, is politics. There's always somebody trying to get your money, to get a piece of it so they have more. They're kind of like locusts, but about every 7 years, the pestilence comes. The systems want to try to gobble up the independent colleges. And I'm going to say it for the sake of humanity here in our oral history, it is not about making Arkansas better. It is about eliminating competition for resources. Because once they convince your board to surrender their independence, then you're no longer a competitor for resources, because despite everything they say about autonomy, I've seen it at the presidential level, and I know how, you're autonomous as long as they say you are. And the day that doesn't work, you're not autonomous that day. You can be autonomous again tomorrow, but you're going to vote this way on this thing. When your local community gives up its independence, when you lose your college, you've lost everything. And those are the biggest threats, where people, and it's something that I really rarely gauged employees with, because you've got things to do. You don't need to be worried about this stuff. I talk about it with my cabinet some, but it's what I was paid to be president to deal with. But those are the biggest threats that we always face, were political threats. People trying to, we love performance funding. Most colleges don't. ANC loves it, because guess what? When the game is accountability and results, ANC is going to win. And that's why a lot of the other colleges didn't like it. They like it based on how many students do we have, or how much money have we been getting, and we can't lose one dime. No. And so there are people always trying to kill that, water that down. And those were the threats that our employees, our students never saw, but that I always dealt with is the CEO, or the political threats.
Well, can you recall any major milestones or achievements that shaped the institution's trajectory?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a few I would like to talk about. Obviously, we've talked about the success of the Solutions Group. Mm-hmm. That put us on a national platform. We've been featured nationally because of that. We have gained a great reputation in our state because of that success. And obviously, it helped shape economic development here. A very, what's the word I'm looking for? Obscure Act 852 of 2015, my favorite piece of legislation ever passed in the state of Arkansas. Because what it created was something called the Economic Security Report. For years, we believed, just anecdotally, we could feel in our gut, that our students were doing better in the workplace in terms of earnings than other colleges. We just felt like we were delivering better students that were more successful in that regard. What this report did, and I think still does, is for every degree program at every college and university in Arkansas, it shows, okay, what do you go out to actually earn the first year? And I know everything in life's not about money, but I would argue to you that 95% of the students that come here are coming because they're eventually wanting a job. And I would say out of that 95%, probably 2/3 of them care about what they're going to make. And so once we had evidence that, yes, we were turning out not only the highest graduate averages of two-year schools, we were beating the bachelor students. Now, I remember in some of the meetings we would have, they kind of hated me in Little Rock, that the fours would talk about, well, but, 5 years from now, that's not going to be the case. That's not going to be the case. Well, guess what? Before I retired, They had enough data to do, okay, what are people earning 5 years after graduation? And guess what changed? Nothing. Our students were still there. Not to mention the fact that think about how much less money they spent going to college for 2 years with us versus 4 years at much higher tuition rates. Everything can't be done in a year or 2 years. Sometimes you may want to pursue a field that requires a doctorate, and that's great. But what I loved about that law is it gave students and parents more information to make decisions, at least know what you're getting into. That's what makes me so passionate about it. The years I was dean, when students would finish, and there were some that just the ashen look on their face when I'd ask them what they're going to do now that they graduated, you can tell if I'd known more in the beginning, I wouldn't have majored in this. Not either because it doesn't pay a lot or because I don't think I'm going to like the work environment or what have you. You need to know those things up front. So you can invest, even if you're using a Pell Grant, it's not unlimited. It's a limited resource. You want to use it the best way you can. I think that was important. There are two big ones I want to talk about. And I hope you got plenty of computer space here. I'm kind of long-winded, but the two of the things that I think really, one kind of served the other. One thing let me go back in time before I was president, about 2 years before I was president. You may have never heard this story. I was CFO then, and I was looking for ways, for us to be more efficient financially. And I was looking at how many students fell away, didn't complete what they were working on. They didn't finish. And, what can we do to help improve that? And so Jim McLean, who's done institutional research at the college for, over 40 years, I asked him to mine 5 years' worth of data, the complete universe of students that attended those 5 years. And then for each one, let me know what their placement score was. How did they do in their English composition courses? How did they do in their college-level math courses or course? And we did this project over Christmas break one year. What we discovered was staggering. Of the students, we had at that time what a philosophy that people referred to as right to fail. Remember that? Everybody has a right to fail, if they can't do it well, but we ought to give everybody the chance. They ought to have the right to fail. If a student can, so we didn't turn anybody away regardless of what their placement score was. We'd put them in college prep courses and college courses regardless of where they were functioning. What we discovered is that the students that were beginning in the lowest writing class, beginning basic writing or something.
College reading.
College reading, yes, college reading, college writing. 11% of those students went on to complete English Comp 2. I'm not talking about a degree. I'm just talking about 1 out of 10 got through Comp 2. Math was even worse. 3% of those students completed their math course, and virtually none of them finished. 1 out of 33 was terrible. I talk a lot about all the things we do great at ANC. No organization gets everything great. We were doing some things that weren't great. And when we unearthed this, tell you an anecdotal story. It's a meeting when we went over all this. Dr. Myers didn't meet with his cabinet very often, but that time we did. That's the first time I understood what blood pressure was, because I'd never had the top of my head hurt so bad. I got so angry in that meeting because I said, we have got to stop this. We've got to do something different. We've got to tear this down and completely rebuild it. And as Dr. Myers, there was pushback. I'm not going to name names, but there was pushback. And Dr. Myers told me after the meeting, he said, and he's right about this. He said, bringing about change in higher education is kind of like changing course on a big ocean liner. You got to make it wide and slow. And he's right in terms of how things had always been done in higher ed. When I became president, I no longer raged against the machine. Now I was the machine. And we changed it all the first semester. And you know what? It worked. Our success rates skyrocketed. Now, we didn't turn anyone away. What we did is we used that same data, and the placement scores you can interpret as where is a student functioning in terms of a grade level. And so if students come in and they're 12th grade level, well, you're ready for every course, every degree program. If you're functioning at what I called low high school, 10 or 11th grade, all right, we're going to let you declare any degree program, but we have one writing, reading prep course to brush you up, and we've got one math course. And we can brush you up if you're that close, but it's not realistic if you're not. That's the model we were using, is we're going to try to brush someone up who's functioning at the junior high level or the 6th grade level. And yes, I hate to say that, people would be shocked to know how many high school graduates are not functioning at the high school level. They're just not. But for those students, well, there's two choices. Okay, so if you're functioning at junior high level, well, here's a roster of technical certificate programs, CP programs, and healthcare, and the allied technologies that you could get into right now. You don't have to go through any prep courses. You can do these now. Or if you don't want to do that, well, okay, we've got a test prep operation, and we'll prepare you, and you can keep working and keep testing until you get ready. Either way. If you're testing at the 6th grade level and below, and every semester we'd get 2 or 3 dozen of those. Here's adult ed. And because we can't, if you didn't get these things while you were in school, we're not going to fix 6 or more years of things you didn't get in a semester or 2. That's not going to happen. It's fantasy. It's going to take at least a couple of years to get you there. And you know what? We've had several students who've climbed that ladder from that rung because we did it the right way. We didn't prepare them to fail. And so that's one of the things that I'm really happy about. And it's an achievement that occurred the first semester I was president, or the achievement occurred later, we changed it, is I killed right to fail. And I'm glad I did, because it was, even though everybody meant well, everybody had good intentions, I get it, it was doing a huge disservice. And we fixed things. And so I'm proud of that. The other thing that I think it helped feed this too, and I still think back on it, it's amazing we did it. We solved the achievement gap at ANC. At the Arkansas Northeastern College in Mississippi County, Arkansas, we defeated the achievement gap. And for anyone listening to this history that doesn't know what that is, what we're talking about is the phenomenon that has been the case for decades, that minority students don't complete at the same rates as white students. There's a gap there. And we could do a whole show on why that may be, but the fact that there's a gap there that no one's bridged. People make progress, they'll make dents, they'll move the needle a little bit. But 5 of my last 6 years, we erased that at ANC. Part of it were these academic changes I'm talking about, but a lot of it, I know you're going to interview Dr. Blanche Hunt, and I'm glad to know that, because she was so instrumental in making this happen, were the things that we did. First thing we did, she wanted me to form the President's Council of local people, but instead of what I think of as the usual suspects that you would have on committees and things, elected people and the usual people. No, we had a lot of pastors, a lot of African American pastors. And we had a couple of officials, but people who knew their community, people who weren't serving on these committees, people who weren't getting asked, what's the issue here? What are the issues? And they told us lots of things, and we listened. And so one by one, we started trying to fashion solutions for what they were telling us. That's where the opportunity bus came from, to provide transportation. That's where the career closet, where we're giving clothes. We have a little food pantry. It's hard to learn if you're hungry. So many different things. We assigned mentors to our students. And I think one of the real keys of success for us in that endeavor, and I'm going to be just really, really frank here, it may not even be politically correct, is the folks we tried to use in those jobs to reach out to those people is we wanted people, I did, who looked like, sounded like, could relate to the folks we're working with. The model that doesn't work, and this is a politically incorrect part, is if you're trying to reach a lower income African American audience, a 25-year-old with an education degree, a white person, is probably not going to work there because they don't relate. There's not a communication. You need people who have lived it. We looked for people who were successful in local careers, either in manufacturing or elsewhere, insurance, people who had grown up in the neighborhood and had been successful and knew what it took to be successful. That's who we would assign as mentors. And I believe it really worked. People, could see someone who was successful, and here's, they're telling you, well, here's the things you need to do. And I think all those things worked. We really stressed a culture of personal responsibility and accountability and tried to get across to students that if you're going to change your world, you're the one that's going to have to change it. And if there are obstacles, let's identify what those are, and let's solve those one by one. Nobody's going to come along and fix this for you. You're going to have to do this. Let's help you find a way. And even there were things sometimes that we could not provide as a college, but we had such a good network through Dr. Hunt's work and her people with other agencies and providers in the area that if it's something we can't help you with, well, maybe we know who can. And we're not going to just, here's the address and you go see. We're going to make a phone call and we're going to initiate this for you because, and you know this, the students you've worked with over the years, if you're in a family where nobody's attended college and this is all scary and you're asking them to, okay, you're going to have to drive somewhere and talk to somebody you don't know in an office that may be intimidating to you, it's probably not going to happen. But if someone that is your mentor, your friend, is facilitating that and make it where it's not as scary for you the first time, then you can do it, and then from then on you're not scared anymore. We have done amazing work at ANC, and there's so many people involved with it, but that, to me, is our greatest achievement.
Well, we have talked a lot about some of the ways the college has adapted, but is there anything else about the college adapting and responding to changes or challenges that you would like to add?
Well, I would mention, I touched on the COVID before, the COVID pandemic. That was such an event that no college, well, nobody had faced before. Nobody even knew what we were facing at that time when it hit. You probably remember the last session we had in the recital hall before I sent everybody home, and I can't tell you when, we're going home, and I don't know when we're coming back. What I'll say briefly about that is our faculty, our staff, absolutely stepped up. We were fortunate that it was spring break that first week, and so that gave us at least a week to try to hustle and figure out what are we going to do. And everybody, even the allied health folks, who to that point, really had not gotten into online because they thought it really would be hard to try to deliver what they're doing online, they realized, well, now we have to. And the science people kind of the same thing. Well, now we have to. You know what? They did it, and they did it well. And they discovered that, there are a lot of things we could do here that even when this is done, we can still do. I'm so proud of the way that our employees responded to that. Everybody, that wanted to finish the semester, they got to finish it. I think there were a couple of disciplines where it took a little bit longer for us to get it together because the things were hands-on. And, at that time there was so much caution about touching things and that sort of thing, common spaces. But it's just amazing. The people, no organization is uniform, but you never have 100%. but we have, at ANC, when I left there, 95% of our people really give a damn about the students, about the community. They're there to do the absolute best they can. And when you have that, that's why, when I became president, Jillian, I made all kinds of bold predictions to people about the stuff we were going to do. And you know what? I'd say that when you go back and look at it, I kept all my word because I had faith in you all. I knew that if you could be unleashed and rewarded and turned loose, that we could accomplish things that no other college ever did. And you know what? We did.
And Dr. Shemwell, I do want to also mention that during COVID, you kept in touch with people. Mm-hmm. You didn't let us out and then just say, you would do these videos
mm-hmm.
to kind of updates, and it's a personal touch that I'm not gonna, I don't know how every college president reacted, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that probably very few were willing to put in that kind of effort and time.
I appreciate that. It's again, thinking of my background, organizational management and leadership, I knew that it was important to try to stay as engaged as we could, and I knew that people needed to feel like they had whatever information we had. They didn't want to be in the dark. And one of the sayings I learned when I was a young person in business, and it's always been true, if you don't fill in the blanks for your employees, they're going to fill them in themselves. And odds are they're going to fill them in with things that either aren't true or they're negative. Because people naturally try to prepare for the worst. And if you don't share information with your people, they're going to fill in their own blanks, and it's going to make life a lot harder for you. And so you need to try to be as transparent as you possibly can be. There's some things that are sensitive that you don't share, but you try to be as transparent as you can be. And, your husband, James Hartley, and I, we did the fireside chats there for a while every week. And it's looking, it wasn't fun at the time, but looking back at it, it was fun.
Well, this is a pretty loaded question, Dr. Shemwell, because you are a native of Mississippi County. So you've been here, you've had some connections even when you've moved, way before you came back. So when you think of the legacy of Arkansas Northeastern College in this area of the country, what stands out to you?
Oddly enough, this is going to be one of my shortest answers. First and foremost, it's the tens of thousands of graduates of the Arkansas Northeastern College who uphold our local economies, who uphold our local communities. That's ANC's legacy. They are. Secondary to that, I would say another big one is who in the world would have thought that the Mississippi County, Arkansas would become the largest steel producing county in America.
I know.
And ANC, obviously, Cliff Chitwood, our mayors, our local people had so much to do with that. But ANC, through its training, played a critical role. And my gosh, who would have ever? That's changed the landscape completely.
I think one of the things from this interview too is that you see this consistent pattern with MCCC and ANC of trying to predict what are the needs of the area
mm-hmm.
and be ready for that. So when you think about the future of community colleges, I think you're definitely in a prime position to think about the future and what that's going to hold. So tell us, what do you envision for future community colleges in Arkansas?
Well, the way I'd like to answer your question is here's what I think colleges that are perceived 10 years from now as successful, this is what it looks like. And I say that to say that not all colleges are going to get this. But I think what we're going to see, well, let me give some context before I make my next statement. So we're getting ready to celebrate the 50th anniversary. 50 years ago, people with a college bachelor degree were relatively rare. And it really didn't matter 50 years ago so much what the field was in. Just the fact that you had gone through that 4 years of studying, taking courses, learning information, passing tests, completing protocols, and all these things to get your degree, it was kind of a professional rite of passage that employers valued greatly. Fast forward, now there's a much higher number of people who have. It's not like it was then. And so with that in mind, I think what you're going to see in colleges that are perceived as successful are more shorter programs with more precise focus on specific skill sets. And the reason I say this is not just my experience in my 29 years. I still watch current events, and what I'm seeing, and it's intensifying, are the number of employers who are not even requiring college degrees anymore. The first wave were like the national retail chains. In their management network, they started moving away from that. But then you started seeing tech companies, IBM, Google, Apple, and there are more and more of them. I'll give you a quick anecdotal example. I have a niece who was a music major and very accomplished. She was an opera singer, just beautiful voice, and spent her first 25 years or so of her career in music. And at one point she was she was between jobs, which kind of happens sometime with music folks. And a friend told her, there's this engineering company, and they're not requiring bachelor's degrees in engineering anymore. And why don't you go interview? You're pretty smart, and why don't you try that? And first she laughed, "Are you kidding?" And no, they're really a good company, and you ought to try it. So, well, it'd be a good experience in the interview. Why not? So she went and interviewed, and they gave her a test. It involved math, but not, here's an equation on a page and solve it. It was more of a word problem. And how do you approach this? And how do you solve this? They interviewed her while they were scoring the test, and they called her out of the room, or called the interviewers out of the room. They said, well, we want you to interview with some more people. And they gave her another, few problems to solve. And then they had a third interview. And then she met with the CEO of the company. What was supposed to be about an hour for an interview, she got a job at the end of the day. And so now my niece, the music major, is an engineer and never had an engineering course in her life. But she had kind of a latent ability there. And people in music have told me if you really get into the music theory in a deep way, and she did, it's kind of like computer programming. And you're using some of those same math logical skills, even though it's music, you're still working within, the eight, the octave, you're still dealing with math in a way. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing more of that. And again, I was always kind of the heretic of higher education in Arkansas, and I prided myself on that. And people never liked it when I pointed out we're using a model that was largely developed 300 years ago to educate European nobility, and it's time for a change. And so I think what you're going to see are more skill-based programs. I think you'll see in the next 5 years, I think Florida's already working on this, a 3-year baccalaureate degree. And I don't mean accelerated 120 hours in 3 years. Right. I mean a 90 credit hour baccalaureate degree. I think, too, that, and this is, I don't know that I necessarily see this happening. I hope it happens. It needs to happen. Is we need to build more of an application-based proficiency in mathematics. A debate we had for years at the college. I'm sure you were on a committee some of those years, and I was always the antagonist to the math people. What I tried to argue, and I don't know that I always did it successfully or in an articulate enough way, is it's not deeper and deeper levels of math we need. Not a relatively small number of people need to know how to do trig and calc and quadratic equations. But nearly everybody needs to build some proficiency in basic arithmetic, adding, subtracting, dividing, multiplying. That includes fractions. And they need to be able to do what I call solve for X algebra. Because if you build those kinds of logical abilities, and I'm sorry, it's not delivered in disciplines that are not math. Those are different skills. Those are not math logical skills. Life doesn't present itself, whether you're on the job, you're at home, life doesn't present itself as an equation on a page with, here's the equal sign. No. We need to develop students' abilities, especially in K through 12, but also in college, to recognize a math problem, recognize a problem and how you can solve it with math, and then solve it. Germany is excellent at this. Japan is excellent at this. The United States is not. We used to be, but we're not anymore. We have got to return to that because there's a massive skills gap that gets worse every year. Whereas there's a shortage of people with those math abilities, and it's why there are jobs today that go unfilled. There's not enough people to fill them. Meanwhile, we've got a huge surplus of people who do not possess proficient math ability. Those are the folks that are employed. Those are the folks who are in jobs that don't pay much. They don't pay much because the employers know there are a dozen people that will take your job at these wages because so many of them are out of work or they're at their convenience store. They'll take your job. We've got to fix this or we're going to have a massive problem. We've got to get better at teaching math. And so I think the colleges of the future are the ones that are going to be more STEM-oriented. The big problem with the math there really is more of a K through 12 problem that has got to be addressed. But I think colleges play a role too. I'll say lastly, that, and this is kind of ominous, but I'll say it, that unless higher education makes some massive change, we have got to change the way we're delivering because employers are already showing it. They're abandoning college degree requirements. If we don't change the way we do things, higher education, a lot of schools are on their way of rendering themselves obsolete in the next 20 years. And you will see public colleges and universities shuttered because they're not delivering what they need to. I'm not worried about ANC because we're always there. We're good at these things. But a lot of higher ed in America is not. And if they don't get better at it, they're going to be some of those folks out of work.
Well, Dr. Shemwell, this has been a phenomenal interview, and you've offered many. You really highlighted a lot of the major turning points, and really a lot of the evidence that you've presented here shows how innovative, and you've always had such a reputation for being innovative, and that's something. As someone who worked for you, I can honestly say I always appreciated. You were the person who could say, let's give it a shot. Mm-hmm. Present your case and let's give it a shot. So are there any other insights you wish to share?
The last thing I would say is that 50 years ago, visionary local leaders and a brave citizenry voted to invest in our county's future. And in the years since, having witnessed all of it, what I can tell you with great confidence is that the ANC family has delivered upon the promise of the college and more. And having played a role in that as president of my hometown college was it was the honor and privilege of a lifetime. I appreciate the interview. Thanks for asking me.
Well, thank you so much for participating, and thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you.
For ANC, Jim.